Comes from architecture. So it should be ArchDaily, but it's ArchDaily because it comes from architecture, ArchDaily. I was studying architecture, but at the same time, as a hobby, I was a tech blogger. I remember I was working to save money when I was a student to buy one book per year, maybe two. If architects had access to better information and could do maybe a slightly better building, we are going to have by scale a better built environment. And it will show you little snippets of their content, because why would they put their content online for free? Many people don't even know where Chile is. These two Latin guys coming with a camera to do a video interview. In that time, it was not so common. The internet is much more efficient than magazines, and we saw the world collapsing. The world is in crisis. Many of our systems were too static, and of course that today the economy is like a bit unstable. Architecture is hyper local, but you need to have this perspective to see what's happening and to understand it. To me, one of the most influential architects of this decade is Evan Sharp. Evan Sharp is an architect from Colombia and is one of the founders of Pinterest. He took the tools of the architect to the mainstream. So I keep wondering, is this kind of the disruption that will pose a risk to architects in another scale? Or is this the alert for us architects to say, we need to maybe focus into what people actually want? People with a fresh eye and less questions can do much more. Now I wonder, what is the next architectural phenomena going to happen?
Welcome to this exhibition. It's called Out of Context. It's an exhibition that celebrates the work of 7 architects that come from 7 different countries from around the world. Everybody is presenting a single project. All projects are wonderfully misaligned. They're very different on different scales, the different materials, completely different ideas explored. And with each architect, I talked about different traces of ideas. Where do they get ideas from? What are they inspired by? And this is what I really want to kind of trace and celebrate the diversity. I don't want them to be aligned. I don't want to have any kind of consensus. I want to discover uniqueness in each work, in each architect, in each author, and really celebrate it. To widen the boundaries of architecture. I don't want to know how to achieve a good building. I want to discover how to do that. And so, welcome to this project. And it has a component which is very interactive. We invite a lot of guest delegates of WAF Miami here to learn, to share ideas, and to discuss very specific views and original views of the profession, and talk about how architecture can be enriched, and and we kind of celebrate that idea. So I want to ask you to first introduce yourself, and what do you do here at WAF?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and also congratulations on your wider curational project, because as you say, this is a representation of the many things that you are seeing, the many people that you have interviewed. And I think it's very important because today we have so many things going on in regards to the World Architecture Festival, but it's also good to have this type of content that is perhaps on a different rhythm with a different type of digestion. So it's good to have it, and I'm glad to join into these live conversations that you're making. And well, I am David Basulto. I'm an architect by training. I was born and raised and lived for many years in Chile. Now I am living in Germany. And I have been, since before graduating, focused on architectural publishing, into embracing new media, embracing what was the internet almost 20 years ago, and continue to dig into this component of the industry that is very important. And also, well, happy to be sharing with the World Architecture Festival that we have. I collaborate as the editor-in-chief of ArchDaily, which was in this past We collaborate with them a lot because the World Architecture Festival wants to truly be global, going across Europe, then to Asia, connecting with the Southeast Asian architects, Chinese architects, Australians. And I was very curious how it will work, bringing all that now into the US and further expanding it with the North American architects, and also hopefully with the South American architects that are always very in their back of the geography, but I think can contribute a lot to global discussions.
Since when are you participating in WAF? And what is your role here at this particular, in Miami, this edition?
Oof, I think I've been collaborating with
From the beginning?
Not because the beginning was Spain, but it was Barcelona.
2008?
Yes, I think 3 years in Barcelona, and then I don't remember if it went to Singapore or Berlin, but that is when I start to join, and I have joined Berlin, Amsterdam, Singapore, Lisbon I didn't, but always as a speaker or a jury, and today I am jurying some of the interiors categories.
Maybe since you saw lots of projects today, maybe you can share a few insights. What kind of projects were discussed, and did you like any particular ones? And what are some of the most memorable? And maybe they can tell us a little bit about our current moment in architecture. What do you think?
At the beginning, I was like very weary of how will these categories work because it's retail and temporary projects. There is a very particular type of project in a very particular scale, but at the same time, that serves a function. It has to deliver value to the clients and in a very straightforward way. So always my question is, how do you balance that with doing something that is a representation of the state of architecture, also something that is environmentally responsible, because many of these type of programs do not withstand decades as other projects of architecture. And I had to say I was very happily surprised because the projects overall were very strong in my category. It's not like we will say, sometimes you say there were very high and very lows, but now it was most, I would say, of a positive average. And now coming from different contexts, and I was also very happy to see how they will, sometimes you will think in retail, there is not so much time or budget to do architecture, but there was this part of, I would say, of the core thinking, like what does an institution represent? There was this questioning, and there was I think also a conscious quest on trying to achieve how not to do the same, and also being environmentally conscious because again, this projects is not that where you can say, okay, I use concrete, this will stand here for decades, so the energy footprint will be lower. And so I was very happy to see this, and again, from all over the world coming together.
Any particular example that stands out in your mind?
Well, I had to say that, and this has happening throughout the years. What these people doing in Iran is fascinating
Oh, wow,
because
there were people from Iran in this category.
It tends to be a bubble because you have many restrictions, you have sanctions, but that makes an internal industry to thrive. They do their own materials, they focus in their own kind of techniques, and eventually this evolves into a very characteristic architecture. What they are doing in terms of brick, in terms of and even more, let's say, more process kind of materials is very interesting. But at the same time, is to see what the architects, some have been formed abroad and come back and bring kind of very forward-thinking ideas, but they have to be realized with the craftsmanship of Iran, with the budgets, with the available materials, and that creates something that I would say today in the world is very, has a strong identity and character.
So it's very resourceful.
Yes, very resourceful.
Let me ask you about ArchDaily. First of all, how do you pronounce ArchDaily or ArchDaily? What's the right way? Or do you accept both?
I don't know, this was an eternal conversation inside, but actually it comes from the proper English grammar. The thing is, when you have ch with a consonant or with a vowel, it's different, but it comes from architecture. So it should be ArchDaily, but it's ArchDaily because it comes from architecture.
And how do you say it?
ArchDaily.
ArchDaily. Because I thought you said in the beginning ArchDaily.
Well, sometimes involved. But when you say consciously, it should be ArchDaily because it comes from architecture.
So it's good to hear it from the founder. So where did the idea come from? Can you tell us about this?
I would say, well, it was a context first because it was the early 2000s when the internet started to become a more bidirectional kind of internet. There were certain tools that would enable self-publishing. I was studying architecture, but at the same time, as a hobby, I was a tech blogger in a tech blog network that eventually became the most read tech blog in Spanish. And then there was my partner, the other founder of ArchDaily, David, sí, David Asael. He was studying urbanism, and he told me this like very bold idea that maybe through information you could improve the quality of life in cities. And this to me resonated a lot because it was the time when information was being available. You know that before, to have an architecture library was so expensive, so difficult. I remember I was working to save money when I was a student to buy one book per year, maybe two. And of course, the internet was going to change all of this. And to this initial statement by the other David, I really believe that if architects had access to better information and could do maybe a slightly better building, we are going to have by scale a better built environment. So then we say, let's use the available tools for self-publishing to do kind of a magazine, but online, publishing projects. And also this poses an interesting challenge because the web is much more flexible than a sheet of paper. So I was also very obsessed about collecting projects in my hard drive, saving many images and stuff. And we could put all of this online in a very easy way. There was no restriction if you will have 4 photos or 30 photos of a project. In this case, more was better. And we started in a very instinctive way, just doing this publishing in Spanish.
When was that?
This was in early 2006. But again, it was the context because nobody was doing it. The publishers were using the web to sell subscriptions. Architectural Record at that time, you will go to their website, is buy a subscription, and it will show you little snippets of their content because why would they put their content online for free? And we were doing this in Spanish and started to grow exponentially. And we were very curious on why is people from China, from the US, from Japan using this website in Spanish. And this was also an interesting reflection because when you are in the global south, you're very used that the main sources of information are in English. So eventually, when you are researching, you learn English by force, by necessity. So the fact that people were coming to us as a source of information and that, I don't know, maybe they needed to use Google Translate or something, we felt that the table was being flipped. So we were having something that was so interesting that English speakers will somehow try to understand it. And then we had this analysis that there is no one doing this in English. The big publishers they are just thinking about continuing their business model on paper. So we said, let's do this in English. It could be interesting. And then we moved from the Spanish name, architectural platform
Also, the
architectura.
name changed.
Because before it was very, I would say, straightforward. It's an architecture platform. But then do it in English, architectural platform was too long. So we said ArchDaily is architecture, is a dailies.
And that was
Fresh.
already what year?
This was 2008.
Another good year in the profession.
Yeah, well, I, and this was important because we were thinking we're doing this from Chile. Okay, there is certain interest, but this is like going to the global world to sell something, to sell technology as Chileans. Many people don't even know where Chile is. And we said maybe we should go to New York. And we had never been there, but we understood this is the center of global architecture. And at that time, many of the international architects, they had to have an office there. So we went there to do kind of a symbolic launch because we didn't do a party or an event, nothing. You're just sitting there doing content, designing website. But we also started to interview architects. So for kind of our opening into English, we went to visit many New York architects who were very curious because these two Latin guys coming with a camera to do a video interview. In that time, it was not so common. So I think they were very curious. So maybe that is why many of them receive us very open. And remember, Joshua Prince Ramos had just started his own office. Shohei Shigematsu has just taken over OMA America. And so many interesting artwork. AC had just won the PS1. So it was all these people doing interesting things. And through them, I think it was how we launched, through their interviews that then start to go viral. And we started into a process of growth, of really exponential growth. But at the same time, during these years appeared Dissing, Architizer. So it was the moment of the beginning of an ecosystem of people doing the same.
And what happened to your career as an architect? When did you shift from doing architecture to focusing entirely on ArchDaily?
Yeah, I think this was very fast. It happened only in 2 years because we were teaching at university. We were doing websites for architects because we knew how to do this and people would come to us. We also started to get clients for projects. And also because my partner was an urbanist, we would get commissions on urban scale, master planning. But we understood architecture is about, you need to be very thorough. You really need to be invested, and especially when you are in the construction site. So we say, do we do both somehow good, or we do one very good, and let's do the one that we like. We really like to do the platform. So we say, let's find a way that we can cover our cost. At the beginning, we were just two person. And let's try to devise a business model that allow us for this to work. It's the internet is much more efficient than magazines. We can do it. And in 2 years, we create a business model, started to work, and we could say we focus 100% on this.
And how fast did you start growing? And I understand that you started opening up locations all around the world, and eventually you became quite a big company, right? Many dozens of people, maybe close to 100 people, right?
Yeah, well, when we started, we were two. I think very quickly we were 4 or 5. And fast forward, when we sold the company in 2020, we were 65 people, and we had offices in Chile, in Colombia, in Mexico, in Brazil, China. We had just opened an office in New York, and we also had full-time people working from Europe, but they will be working from home. And again, this was, I think, a process, also being in the right places at the right time. And yeah, when you say 2008, what a year it was. Because we were in New York the week when Lehman Brothers went bankrupt.
Yeah.
And we saw the world collapsing. But then also understood we're in a process of globalization. It was around that time also that appeared the term BRIC economies, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And perhaps globalization was going to be the translation of not the American model export to the world, but also the world really expressing. And that is why it led us to understand, for example, the strength of Brazil. Brazil is almost 300 million people. It has always been a very self-sufficient economy with big industry, big consumption, a lot of construction. And to understand that, when you are very as a Latin American, you're very used that the US is the world, is the main market, is everything, but now start to appear other markets. It was the rise of China. It was also what started to happen in India. So we said perhaps this world for us is much closer than North America, than Western Europe. And at the same time, we started to see a new architecture emerging from there. An architecture that I think also because of our mindset, we were much faster to connect with. For us to relate to Brazilian architects, Argentinian architects, were very similar to how we connect with Vietnamese architects, with Chinese architects. So that is what took us, let's say, into this southern journey rather than to just focus on the US. The US was always our biggest market in terms of sales, in terms of traffic. But when China passed US in terms of traffic, that was for us
And it did.
yes.
It did. So now it's number one, right? As far as
Yes, until the last time that I was I was in the company, it was China, which you understand by scale, but also the top 10 that used to be UK, Germany, France, the G7, it became all these other countries, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Iran, that are countries that are in this process of growth, process of economical growth and rapid development of their own architectural scenes.
you let the company go in, you said 2020, and you were still a part of it for a while, right? And then you let it go completely. By what time?
Yes, we sold it in 2020, and I continued to work with the new company for 4 years until December last year. But it was already time to move forward.
Okay, and no regrets that you sold it, I guess.
No, it's something that we wanted to do. So me and my partner we were always conscious. This is something that we are doing. So there are no regrets.
Is it
Not
still,
we shouldn't have done it.
Is it still growing? Do you know?
But now it's evolving because media today is changing a lot. And from the outside, I see a strengthening of the editorial content. I see perhaps a new focus, but also a constant understanding of where the world is going. So these things I think are still very present and strong in the editorial process of the new team.
So you finally let it go, and what are you doing now, or what are you planning to do next? What's your focus?
Well, this industry and the impact of the built environment continues to be of uttermost importance. And this is my industry, so I want to stay connected to it. But I have taken the last 2 years to try to understand what is happening, where is going to be the next places that you need to look, and also what is the new possibilities of media. I feel that everything is like cycles. And many of the websites that start in the early 2000s, this new independent media that became the most influential media that replaced many of the paper media, eventually became parts of corporations, of big groups, and eventually became part of the global machine. And what is the new? And now I see people like we're in a more decentralized era. You see the creators across every industry, and this is happening in architecture. You are a representation of this. People who have a vision of a particular segment of the industry and are creating ways in a different way. You don't need let's say, the traditional architecture website as support, but you live across media, you move between physical and digital. And I see this happening more and more. So I'm trying to understand like what is needed. And there is a question of what, but also the question of where. We saw this phenomena of the global south architecture. We saw Chinese architects going from being very few to hundreds of thousands. And now I wonder, what is the next architectural phenomena going to happen? What is happening in the Gulf is interesting not just because they have a lot of resources and they invest in the built environment and they want to do things of a certain quality, but also there is a generation young people who went to study abroad, who understand the world, came back. They are not the ones who are building now, but they are the ones who are winning the small scale projects, the ones that are being recognized abroad. And it's a matter of time until they are given the opportunity to do the big buildings, the important, the relevant programs, and they will materialize, I think, a new architectural identity.
You travel around the world a lot. You participate in many festivals of architecture, I guess. You meet a lot of architects. How would you assess the current moment in the profession? Would you say, we are at a high point, or is it a crisis, or is the crisis coming, or we are already in crisis? How would you assess, and where would you say is the most interesting architecture happening today?
Well, it's many things at the same time because, and that is why I try to participate in different events. A couple of weeks ago, I was speaking in Colombia. This event here, I was holding opening an architecture exhibit in Berlin. So I try to see all of this because, of course, architecture is hyper local, but you need to have this perspective to see what's happening and to understand it. And of course, that today the economy is like a bit unstable, and also happened that creative industries are, because the tech world was endangering many professions, but we said no, creativity is not going to be affected by this, but it is, something is starting to happen. Luckily, at least in Europe, I see a lot of architects hiring right now. So I say maybe things are not that bad. Well, because it's also cycles. They are starting projects that probably will see the light in 5 more years. This cycle is already closed.
Talking about Germany. You're talking about
See, Germany, I see people hiring, which during this year until the last 2 years, I think was very dry. Because for many people, it's the cycle of projects. Projects were coming to an end. There was not something new. In Germany, there was a big shake because many of the big developers went bankrupt and things came to a still. But because now I see so many people hiring, I think we're at the beginning of perhaps the next cycle. But I think that the biggest change in architecture has to be with tech, because our industry has been very undigitalized. In all the tech forecasts, architecture, construction, and agriculture were kind of at the bottom of digitalization. Of course, IT, retail, finance, healthcare, technology enter, change the cost structures, deliver, I would say, positive changes to people, but also replace a lot of labor. And now this is starting to happen into architecture and construction. And for the consultancy firms, this is the next internet. This could be a kind of, now is kind of a wild west. There are billions of venture capital entering here because, this is a very complex industry, from managing a creative office, project delivery, on-site construction, and the life cycle of a building. And all of this is very hard to manage. You have a lot of obscure points. Nothing talks to the next step, and there is a lot of loss of energy and resources. So there have come people saying, why is this so inefficient? We can do it better. Caterra tried to say we can take the whole cycle. It was a big bet. They put billions, and they tried to do everything, acquiring architectural practices, assembly lines, materials manufacturers, and tried to offer to big institutions the ready building solution. They were too ambitious. Maybe they were ahead of time, and this collapsed. This doesn't mean that it's not possible. Now I see a whole generation of new tech startups start by architects who want to solve a particular problem. The design software stack, construction, robotic construction, simulation through and doing this through technologies that before were completely NASA level. Now anybody can use a drone. Anybody with a very cheap camera and even with the phone can do a LiDAR scan of a space, can start to map all the services, all the hardware of a building. And I see many young architects taking on this. And the world of capital is backing this, is saying, this is where we should be going. So I see this new entrepreneurs scene in US very strong. The problem, they are not here. They are not in the architecture magazines. They are not part of, and this creates an interesting divide because, to me, one of the most influential architects of this decade is Evan Sharp. Evan Sharp is an architect from Colombia and is one of the founders of Pinterest. Pinterest is a company of like $20 billion valuation used by hundreds of millions of people every day. And when you understand this, this is what we do in architecture. You put ideas, you pin them to the wall to foster a creative thinking, interact with others. He took the tools of the architect to the mainstream and perhaps help a lot of people in the way, create a new economy and so on. But when you go to his profile on Pinterest, he has his bio and he says ex-architect. And I had the chance to meet him very early during the creation of Pinterest, and I asked, why ex-architect? You're an architect. What you're doing is a work of architecture. And this started to also be common in the architect industry, that is a meetup group started in San Francisco, then New York, now it's global, of architects working in tech. During these meetups, they will introduce themselves. Oh, hello, I'm John. I study in Berkeley. Now I work in Google. Oh, hello, I'm Patrick. I study in Colombia. Now I do interface design at Meta. But I don't build. And they all will say this part like with a big heaviness. Probably working in the tech industry, they do much better than any architect. But they all have this feeling of not being fulfilled because you study architecture for so many years that used to be something very straightforward. You study architecture, you do buildings. So now,
There are many different.
of course, you can be in other parts of this, but probably to anybody that you will introduce yourself as an architect, they will ask you, what do you build?
Well,
It happens to me a lot.
Speaking of buildings, you have traveled the world quite a bit. You've seen many buildings, not just on this in these presentations, being on the juries, but in person, right? If you could go over some of the most memorable experiences of visiting, buildings, projects that became quite striking and memorable, and something that you can't quite forget, and that's something that you would recommend others to visit, what would you recall?
Yeah. Well, of course, I think there are these canonical buildings that at a point in our history were so breakthrough, and that when you go to see the Mies Pavilion and you think how they were doing this early in the past century, like really this person was thinking so differently. Because if you don't know about the history part, the context, you say, oh, this looks like a contemporary construction, nice, but very similar to maybe other things. So that is why I think these canonical buildings like the Pantheon carry this, and you need to understand them in their context. But I have to say that during this last year, I would say in the last decade, you see very good projects, but not something that you will say is as moving as that. But now I saw the Louvre in Abu Dhabi, and it was kind of those buildings I say, that wow, like this is a magnificent piece of architecture, it's creating a new reality, it's done unlike anything I've seen. And the same happened with the Expo Osaka.
Oh, you went there?
Yes.
When did you go?
I went the day before they closed.
Oh, just
Yeah, just now.
in October.
Because I also, like through the images, you were feeling there is something I say, I need to see it. And I was completely moved because it's something so primitive, it's so elemental in its construction as a concept, but then it gives you this kind of very experience feelings like we as humans, we try to conquer nature, going up, creating the tallest, things like this. And this was something so humble that will give you, I think nobody ever tried to, in this expos or show, to put you in a place that you will see everything and absorb it by having this single view.
So you talk
So
about the
elemental.
ring by
Yes, the ring.
Fujimoto. Yeah.
And the construction in today that we're thinking like, what is it responsible that we do such big events, this moving so much energy, so much carbon, so much resources? In this case, you will say, well, it was so smart. They really achieved this. And I think, and reading the media, for many people, their evaluation of this was very positive. And actually, this is said to be dismantled. And in a way, this was the thing. We built this, but it will be completely disassembled and disappear. And now people are saying, maybe we can preserve this. It's
really?
so powerful.
Okay.
This was the discussion on Japanese media because it was so successful and works so good as a building that people were discussing maybe we should find a way to maintain it. We will see what happens.
Oh, this is interesting. I wonder, you have again so much experience about, visiting different projects, seeing so many different projects, especially contemporary projects that are being built right now or just recently were completed. What kind of, and you participate on the jury a lot. What kind of qualities are you looking for when you are introduced to other architects' buildings, or when you explore, when you visit other architects' buildings?
I would say that first for me is very important about identity. This globalization always has this shadow that things start to look kind of the same. But I think architects in general are very push. Nobody wants to do the same. And it's a very positive exercise because we're constantly seeing this in a global arena, for example, like the World Architecture Festival, and this makes people go beyond. So it's very positive. And I think that there is kind of a new regionalism appearing. I think we're in a similar time that gave birth to modernism when the world was in between wars. There was a questioning like, where are we going as society? And there is all this technology, the ships, the cars, the assembly lines. How can we bring this into architecture? I think the Bauhaus did it in a very positive way and also in a transdisciplinary way. And eventually we went into the international style that tried to make everything in the world look the same because we could. But as a counterpoint, we had the regionalism. So the expression of this modernism in the Middle East, in Latin America, and it was a very interesting moment. I think that event after that strong moment, architecture kind of drift, maybe went more into arts, about the technical aspects, and it didn't have a big leap as it did in that time. But I feel that now we're in that time. We went through this globalization that tried to homogenize things. But I think that especially empower architects in this global south, in the Middle East, are having the resources, the tools to create, and they are doing it with a strong identity. When you see these brick buildings in Iran, you say, "Whoa, this is the new Iranian architecture." When you see what young architects from the Gulf are doing with the stone, with the palm fibers, you see this is coming from there. So now I feel that we're in this second wave, and this is something that I value. It's like when you look at something, how it is an expression of its local culture, local society, and materials. And secondary is, of course, the responsibility. Is this building adding value? Because now we understand maybe there are things that don't need to be built, and the way we do it is very important. It doesn't have to be something very high tech or that everything is recycled. To do a good building that works, especially in terms of climate, it will already be something sustainable and it will last longer. So, and I
So
think
you're
that this is something you see.
you're
you
still
see.
looking for buildings that work
Yes, I think it's
because
it's possible.
yeah, it's possible, but I have since I've seen so much and I know that buildings can work. Um, uh, I want to discover something that maybe works, maybe doesn't work, but I want to be surprised for different reasons. I want to find, very different experience. I want to be surprised. I want to see a very different, very different materials, very different set of materials, how they put together, how it's explored by the visitors. Maybe I want to, be with a building one-on-one, find those very rare moments. I don't know what I want. I want to see, I want to give it a chance and kind of discover it and be surprised. And when I see something very unusual, uncommon, whether this works or not is the last question I would even want to ask. But you want to know that something works.
But maybe there are different degrees because as now you're describing something that I would say it worked because it generate all these feelings in you, and it's also important part of architecture. Of course, that is you have maybe extremes to be completely utilitarian, but of course, that architecture has to do with aesthetics, with maybe embodying ideas of a culture and society. So when I say it works, it can be in any of these dimensions and not just in the completely utilitarian.
Yeah, yeah. I just try to be more kind of selfish. I have my own selfish interests in pursuing architecture. So I think it's very difficult to assess a building. You've been on the juries a lot, but it's in my opinion it's very difficult to assess a building when you give it a certain mark. Like you say, you have 10 different categories, and is it a good building if it performs on from the scale 1 to 10, and it goes very high on every level. Maybe it goes up to 8 on every single category. So would that be a good building? But because in my case, if in one of the categories it hits 10, that's a good building. It doesn't mean that all the others should be just 1. But if on in one of those categories it's 10, this is something very special.
Well, probably there are projects that will leak and they are still amazing buildings.
They may fix it. But
But
I will give them some time to, I can come back. I've seen buildings by our Caesar, for example, and he is one of the top architects. If you ask anyone, he's one of the most favorite architects anywhere in the world. But I've seen buildings on day one opened by our Caesar that not only it leaked, but even the floor would buckle and the facade tiles would just fall because it would just crumble, and the pollution, you would see the pollution on day one. But then you come back half a year later, it's all fixed. So you can just evaluate something because it doesn't address, those basics. You go inside and the parquet floor is all buckled and, the glue was not holding. I'm talking about the museum in Santiago de Compostela, one of the most beautiful buildings. If you go there today, it will not have those problems. But when it opened, it did. And you can't just take that memory and hold it for the rest of your life that, okay, that building didn't perform very well. It's like seeing a person on a bad day, but then you seeing that person a week later, and it's a very different impression.
And perhaps this dimension, of course, many buildings are many decades old, but the question of post-occupancy was always separated from architecture. Because like after, you don't know what will happen. It's people that don't take care of a building. It's people who don't use it properly. But I think that this is now being addressed because many people are saying, okay, we design buildings in a certain way, and you need to do a follow-up, especially now that we build things perhaps more high-tech that will have a functional system, some sort of daylight, sunlight protection, incorporation of daylight, and all this kind of, and doesn't only need to be mechanical, it can also be passive, but there needs to be a follow-up. And I have heard this more and more in conference. Of course, it's a cost that it's not easy to bear, because even if you want to do it as an architect, it's like, are you going to visit all your projects over time? But I think the question of post-occupancy and the life cycle of the building is becoming a much more discussed theme. And also, but there's a whole set of technology that allows you to measure and to fine tune buildings. And I see that now more architects, especially this new generation of tech entrepreneurs, will enter into this part of the industry.
Yeah. Well, I agree about post-occupancy because I have seen buildings that were, misused. They the occupants would take over, and I'm talking about especially residential projects. So, it was kind of mismanaged. And you can blame the architect, or maybe it's because of the management, but when it gets out of control, it's very, it's a pity that good architecture that looked great on day one didn't actually was not maintained and lost all of their qualities. And nobody talks about a building that's 5 years old, and nobody comes back, nobody cares how it looks today. It was all published, it was all celebrated, all the awards were given, and then 5 years later, it could be a complete disaster. So I agree, that's a major problem. Finally, I want to ask you, what kind of advice would you give to a young architect?
I think now we're in a very positive moment that technology is helping a lot of people to do more and better. And this can eventually reshuffle the cost structure of architecture. I think a lot of people want to commission architecture, but not in the traditional way that we think, the singular house, the museum. And I think that young architects are being smart to understand what is my point of entry. And that has a lot to do with how people live, is the closest part. That is the interiors, that is the interior expansions, renovations. That often is something that you will say, I don't want to do the renovation, I want to do a new object. But here is where the opportunities are. And also, again, it's about doing a smart use of technology, that you can do things. You don't need to have a big overhead. Now, for example, in the Aga Khan Award, Spectacular Works of Architecture, one of the finalists, he told me,
Did you participate on a jury?
yes, I participated in the cycle, so I could meet some of the finalists, and one that did a very interesting project of good architecture of a sizable scale, young architect, and he told me, my office is just me. Of course, he works with other people, different
But they are
disciplines, but in a way, he says, my office is just me. If I need to work with more people, I will hire them. And at the end, I just work from home. And I was like, whoa, this is possible to have this very low overhead kind of company and still do this type of architecture. So that, I think, is really changing the way we do things. Or also how others are entering into the field of architecture. Now, during the last years, I met an entrepreneur, a software engineer, that started one of the early interior design AI models. He created kind of a a big debate in architecture because he was the first to crawl images of architecture and create the model that you will prompt and will create buildings. And he was like questioning what is the role of the architect, what will happen. And the first thing he told me is that, this is nice, but you cannot do a building with this. To do a building is another kind of level of detail that you need to reach. Not even if I give this image to an architect, he could do this. And he understood with this early technology that many people just wanted kind of quick ideas or kind of what architects don't like when a friend comes to you and say, oh, can you give me some ideas to redesign my living room? You don't want this because how do you build it? It's low effort, but you still need to build the hours that you at a rate that supports your office. So this guy understood there is people that are willing to pay a few hundreds of dollars to get ideas on how to redecorate or remodel their interiors. And he pivoted into doing this, it's called interiorAI.com, which you upload photos of your house and it just gives you ideas. And this guy, because he's software engineer, he's doing all the live coding. So he shares everything he's doing and also how much he's selling. So he's selling recurring revenue of tens of thousands of dollars per month. So this stacks over in a year and creates something so interesting by finding what architects or interior designers didn't want to serve because it was low ticket, but that actually people really want. So I keep wondering, is this kind of the disruption that will pose a risk to architects in another scale? Or is this the alert for us architects to say, we need to maybe focus into what people actually want? And of course, through technology and through creation, find a way to deliver. So I think that it's a very good time to be a young architect starting without perhaps the heavy baggage that the ones who have been working on this for decades have, that probably say, this is not possible, it's too cheap, it's too expensive. People with a fresh eye and less questions can do much more.
Yeah, so the architects have to be much more open and ready to reinvent very familiar models of even operating in the profession and reinventing, how they go after clients and what can they offer and how to use the technology. So it's just getting more and more complicated, right? And they need to be alert and look into so many possibilities and not just prepare themselves for a particular route, right? So a bit much more open and ready to turn left and right all the time, or around, or U-turns.
I think it's I don't like to use the word crisis so much. It's like too pessimistic, but the world is in crisis. Many of our systems were too static, didn't adapt. The modern project eventually started to fail because it didn't evolve. So now in this moment, if you are flexible enough, if you are able to give it a twist, I think you can do good.
Okay, David. Very good speaking to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.